One of you cut your TV volume down just a little bit too.
I think that may be mine. Hold on just a minute. Let me tell my son. Turn it off. Turn it off. Just turn it off. Yeah, just leave it off. Go use the other TV. Okay. Now, is that better?
Yep, that's much better. And we are live on Facebook. This is ShonSpeaks, and thank you for tuning in to the Up Talk My Life podcast. This is a special edition. This is a lunch break edition. I wanted to come on to the podcast and also go live in the Juneteenth Blackout group because I want to talk about Breonna Taylor, the case, the problem, the law, and possible solutions. And I have here with me, I wanted to have a discussion that's our discussion, not what you see on CNN, not what you see on Fox, not what you see on MSNBC. I wanted to have a discussion with real people who, first of all, look like us and who can bring different avenues of opinions and perspectives that can add to the conversation and also aid in understanding what has happened. I have State Representative Harold Dutton on the Zoom today, and I also have attorney Arthur Washington. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and just kind of tell us a little bit about themselves before we get into the conversation. And I'll start with you, State Rep Dutton.
Well, thank you for inviting me. First of all, let me say thank you and hello again to my colleague, Arthur Washington. I'm Harold Dutton. I'm the state representative in District 142. This is my 18th term in the legislature. And more recently, I'm the chairman of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. And I'm glad to be here with you and glad to be sitting down talking with my colleague.
Thank you. Arthur?
Yeah, hello to everyone. Yes, hello, Harold. Good to see you. Classmates, class of 1990, I believe.
Right.
We've been doing this quite a while. So my name is Arthur Washington, and I primarily practice criminal defense work in Houston. I used to sit as an associate referee and judge in the juvenile courts. And I'm just glad to participate here in this discussion. Hope to educate those of us that need educating, and I'm one of those included. With this great topic.
Perfect. Well, thank you. All right, so everyone knows that the grand jury reached a decision regarding the Breonna Taylor case, and they basically indicted one person, and I think his name is Hankinson. He was the only one that was actually charged. And it looks like they charged him with wanton endangerment. I think Arthur just kind of went out. Oh, you're back in, Arthur.
Thanks.
All right, cool. No problem. And so anyway, they charged Brett Hankinson with wanton endangerment. And then the grand jury returned an indictment on Mr. Hankinson for wanton endangerment. And so what I want to do is, I woke up today and someone had sent me something, and they made a point of basically saying, I want to kind of read what they said. I should have had that open. Hold on for just a sec. I can find it real fast. And it was very interesting. It said a cop murdered a Black woman and only got charged for the bullets that missed. And so that, when I first saw that, it sort of kind of took me back for a minute. I was kind of like, wow, I didn't have anything to say. But then, of course, I put my legal mind back on and started to really think about it, which is what made me want to put this podcast on today with you guys. So let's talk about that, right? Let's understand what happened with this Breonna Taylor grand jury decision. Who wants to jump in there first?
Well, I'll start. Let me say again, thank you. I don't have all the facts and information that went to the grand jury, but in most cases in America, before a person is charged, generally, there's a grand jury hearing, which is made up of 12 citizens of that community, and they come together. And what they're required to do is essentially look at the law. What does the law say? And what do the facts say happened? Now, the person that presents that in most cases happens to be a lawyer too, who is called the district attorney. And they present those facts and suggest that each of the charges that are presented to them have certain elements, and their determination is whether or not those elements fit any of the elements of a crime. And when they don't find that, then they return in no indictment. And when they do find that, they indict the person. Now, having said all that, one of the things that's been happening in this country is we have found ourselves victims of a system. And let me tell you what that system is. Years ago, people acknowledged that police officers have a difficult job. They have a difficult job, and sometimes they have to make what would be tantamount to a split-second decision. And so there were certain laws crafted that take them out of the general negligence claims that most of us have to live under, because they engage in those dangerous activities and make those split-second decisions. What we find ourselves in right now is all of those statutes and laws that are in place that protect police officers. Now we find that they actually give bad policing, bad police misconduct, a way out, so that they don't get charged a lot of times, because these statutes exist, because these statutes were created presumably under the same guise that I just gave you, that police officers doing a difficult job make split decisions and can't be held to the same standard as you and I might be. Well, what we find is that more often has been used as a shield against punishment when police officers engage in conduct against Black folks. Either they've been killed or they have been hurt to some extent. And so that's where we find ourselves. But most people, what we don't understand is that everything that's bad is not illegal. Everything that happens that's bad is not illegal. If we may look at it on television and find that that is absolutely the most atrocious thing I have ever seen, because based on what I saw on television with Breonna Taylor, I found it abhorrent. I just think that's terrible. But now when it comes to applying the law to that, again, these elements of the law to that, I might have to make a different conclusion rather than one that's based out of my emotions. Because I don't know, for example, what was said on the warrant that was issued. What gave them permission to get the warrant? To what extent were there lies told, maybe, to get the warrant? Why were they enforcing a warrant at that time of morning with a no-knock warrant? But yet they said that someone said that they did announce themselves. What would you and I think if somebody were breaking in my house at that time of morning, and I knew I hadn't committed any crime, or maybe if I had committed a crime, I don't know, but at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, somebody breaks in my house, I can tell you I'm not gonna ask whether it's the police. My first instinct is to start shooting back to prevent the entry into my house. Now that's what happened. That's what I saw on television. I saw some officers going into a house, trying to break into a house at that time of morning, which I think is absolutely crazy and absolutely wrong, which is why I think a lot of jurisdictions have not outlawed it, but they've certainly taking a better look. And why would you engage in these kind of raids? Because it puts the police officer in danger. If I were a police officer, I would have said, well, I'm not going to be the first one to go in that house.
Mhm.
because I mean, I'm putting myself in danger. But the bottom line is this: as the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, I'm pleased to say that we have we have now developing what we call the George Floyd Act, um, that encompasses changes in the law that we anticipate need to be made to make whole society a safer place and give bad policing, bad police misconduct, to shed the light on it and provide the appropriate punishment when police officers engage in certain behavior that should be illegal, that right now may not be illegal.
May not be illegal.
That's right.
Absolutely. State Rep Dutton, I absolutely agree with you, because I think a lot of times we focus on our emotion of it, right? That initial emotional reaction that has to be wrong. What these cops did has to be wrong. And it may be bad, but not necessarily illegal.
Exactly.
One of
And
the
it may
things,
well be wrong,
it may well be wrong, but
but
not
it's not
illegal.
illegal. That's
But not
exactly
illegal.
right.
One of the things before I jump to you, author, is when I was started law school, I read a book called A Man for All Seasons by Robert Bolt.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this book, but there's a quote in it, and I kid you not, it sticks with me. And this was just a perfect conversation for it. I'm just going to read it. And it's a dialogue. It's William Roper says, "So now you give the devil the benefit of the law?" Sir Thomas More replied, "Yes. What would you do? Cut a great road through the law to get after the devil?" William Roper replied, "Yes, I cut down every law in England to do that." And then Sir Thomas More replied, "Oh, and what when the last law was down and the devil turned round on you? Where would you hide, Roper? The laws all being flat. This country is planted thick with laws from coast to coast, man's laws, not God's. And if you cut them down and you're just the man to do it, do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would blow then? Yes, I give the devil the benefit of the law for my own safety's sake." And the reason I love that is because this podcast is not about getting rid of the laws. I like the law, right? I like the law, and the law is beneficial. But what this podcast is about is learning how to think about the law and utilize the law that's more beneficial for us. And that's the thing I think we have not been doing. And that's the thing I want us to start to do. As Arthur and I was talking earlier today, I woke Arthur up real early in the morning. I know I just really got on his nerve, right? But what we talked about was it's time for us to start to think more strategically, right? Thinking sort of ahead of the game, right? And so I want to kind of talk about how we need to start to use the law, author, for our benefit, and not just kind of get rid of the law.
Well, if I may, first of all, offer my prayers and condolences to the Breonna Taylor family.
Absolutely.
A tragic loss. And to those other families where they've lost loved ones in incidents very similar. On both sides of the deal, law enforcement has been lost in situations, and private citizens' lives have been lost as well.
Absolutely.
You this morning in your conversation hit the nail on the head, and it really comes down to an education of what is the law and how do we conduct ourselves and how do we live. And by no means are we implying that Ms. Taylor did anything wrong, and her education, from what I understand, was impeccable. An educated woman working, so forth and so on. But as a community, as I mentioned earlier, I think we're doing our forefathers a disservice. They fought, and they fought hard for us to have the right to vote. They had fought so hard for us to be able to be in places and in positions that could affect change. And while we see the protests that are going on, and we understand that's a cry out to say, hey, something needs to happen. Let's focus on the loss, but let that inspiration of that loss, let us be motivated to make the change. The change starts with education. Equip yourself with the knowledge So therefore, you will not be abused or misused, but challenge yourself to be better. Challenge those that work for us to be better, to hear us, to listen to us. I kind of wanted to piggyback on a little bit of what Representative Dutton talked about in the grand jury.
Okay.
Educating yourself through the entire legal process, whether you're a part of it or not. Either you know someone that's been through it, going through it, or yourself may have been through it. A grand jury does consist of 12 folks. The state of Texas has it where, and mostly throughout the country, where a defendant doesn't even know they've been indicted because they don't have a right to even participate in the grand jury process. What's evident here, though, is the state, through its prosecution, has the right to present what they think at the end of the day they can meet as their burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. If the matter were to be true billed, indicted, and then going to trial. Looking at the charges and what the public wants out of the Breonna Taylor case, we look at it from a non-law perspective, and there was a murder. There was a death. Then what the prosecutor has to look at is what evidence surrounds that particular charge, and what do they think they can make in a trial if it reaches that far. I took the time to educate myself on, I believe it's Mr. Cameron, the Attorney
Daniel
General
Cameron.
there. Yes. And I read his comments, and I can understand why they ended up where they ended up. Reading his comments, the suggestion was they didn't feel, and he didn't come out and say it directly, but he felt like they had a stronger case to present to a jury later down the road of wanton disregard. If you look and see what the grand jury thought in regard to whatever facts, and Mr. Dutton and I don't know those facts that were presented, but if you look at it, two or three of the other gentlemen weren't indicted at all.
And they were not even charged.
They were not even charged. So it just tells us that we have to educate ourselves on the facts. It's a very emotional because it is very prevalent that we're seeing this in our community, the loss of life. But let not their loss of life, for instance, with the George Floyd. I'm glad to see the legislators say, hey, enough is enough. So they're taking action. The action being, let's change the laws so that these laws that are on the books exist no more. We're in 2020. There certainly are suggestions that I can make and others can make in how that whole no-knock situation with the warrant goes away. We've got televisions and cameras and phones and everything else. We know where everybody is at every second if you really wanted to know. So there's room there to modify those things. And that's not just simply to modify it on one side of the fence. Again, it's dangerous for an officer to walk into a blind situation. You know, we could be looking at multiple deaths here had things gone really in a different direction. So educating ourselves is tantamount to really true public safety, true public betterment, and overall just good humanity. Us living in a peaceful, human, earthly world.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And just to bring clarification, Daniel Cameron is the Attorney General for Kentucky, and he was brought in as a special prosecutor from my research to replace Tom Wine, who is actually the Commonwealth Attorney, I guess, which would be like the DA, which is what we would call it in Texas, because he had to recuse himself for whatever reasons. He recused himself in Daniel Cameron. Now, Daniel Cameron, as many of you all know, he's an African-American guy. He's a Republican, but he, when he came in after their investigation, and one of the things as attorneys we know, it's all about the facts. And based upon those facts, he decided that of the three police officers who participated in the shooting at Ms. Taylor's apartment, to only charge Brett Hankison. And I think based on what I could find, they charged Mr. Hankison because he was actually outside of the apartment. I think either on a patio or something, but he was actually outside of the apartment, and then he shot I think 10 rounds, and some of those rounds actually landed in some other tenants' apartments other than Miss Taylor's apartment. Okay. And so based upon that, that is where they, I guess the basis for the charge of wanton endangerment came in at. And so, but I think the other two officers did not get charged at all. They're still police officers. I think they've been just reassigned. But let's talk about real quick, because I think the point that both of you have made is that, yes, it's emotional. Yes, from what I could just see as a layperson watching TV, police officers came into somebody's house in the middle of the night, shot her, 8 times, killed her, took this precious life, and that just seems wrong. And it is wrong. Nobody is disputing the wrongness of what has occurred. All right. But what we want to do is we want to understand how that wrong was right under the law, so that we can then talk about and come up with solutions of how to fix the underlying problem in the system that allowed 3 police officers to execute a no-knock warrant on a narcotics, am I pronouncing right? A drug charge, right? They were trying to find some drugs. And this is the interesting facts. I don't even know if y'all know this. The interesting fact is that the ex-boyfriend, I think his name is Jamarcus Glover, who they were thinking that he was doing drugs coming in and out of Miss Taylor's house. He had already been arrested the same day that this incident occurred at night. He had already been arrested and let out on bail. So that does make me question the need of even having a no-knock warrant to investigate somebody that you had in your possession. But let's talk about the no-knock warrant. How do police officers get no-knock warrants? Why does the law even allow that, State Rep Dutton?
Well, most warrants are issued by a court, by a judge. You have to make application to the judge for a warrant, and you state the basis for the need for a warrant. You also include in that if there's a need for a no-knock warrant, you have to include that. That's why I was saying earlier that I have not seen the warrant. I don't know to what extent the warrant is factual or truthful. I don't know anything about it, but given what you just said about they had arrested her boyfriend earlier that day, she hadn't been dating him for over a year. What was the basis in the warrant for going by Breonna Taylor's home at that time of morning? What was the basis for that? Let me say this: most people somehow or another are not aware of the law. They're not aware of the law. I mean, they just think the law is what as a first year law student you're taught. The law is not what you think it is. The law is what it is. And that comes from your legislators. That law comes from your legislators, the people who represent you. Now, a lot of people don't have any interaction with them. They might vote for them, but they don't have any interaction with them. So they don't even know what it is. I was giving a class one day, talking to some youngsters. I developed what I call the course in street law. And one of the first questions I asked them is, I'm not suggesting anybody ought to use marijuana, but if you're standing in the park and the police are driving up and you had a joint of marijuana in your hand, what would you do with it? Would you throw it on the ground? Do you put it in your mouth, or you put it in your pocket? Well, most of them get it wrong because they think, well, I'll throw it on the ground. Well, if you throw it on the ground, there's something that the police can say, well, possession, it looks like, I saw you throw this on the ground. What is it? And he has the right to go and investigate it and figure out that it's a marijuana cigarette. You put it in your mouth, he can ask you, what are you chewing? What's in your mouth? But he has no right to ask you what's in your pocket. And so most of them get it wrong because the answer is you put it in your pocket. You put it in your pocket because he has to have some reason to go in your pocket. He doesn't need a reason to go look on the ground. Now, the legislators, and thank God for them, the Texas Legislative Black Caucus has been in existence for almost 48 years. And I can tell you that if you go back and you looked at the history of the changes that they proposed over those 48 years, you'll find that had Texas enacted any of those, many of those, we'd be in a different place right now, because that is something that Black legislators have been challenging over a long period of time. When I had a bill during the last session that said, if and it simply said this: if you're charged with only solely resisting arrest, at least they ought to tell you what you were being arrested for in the first place. The law doesn't require that right now. Doesn't require that you be told that you have to know why you're being arrested. I tried a case like that one time, not in this jurisdiction, but in another one. And and the first question after they found him not guilty, the first question the jury asked me was, why was he being arrested in the first place? I said, well, I don't know that. I couldn't answer that because that's not part of the charge, and it doesn't require that police officer to even tell you that. Well, one of the challenges we have as legislators over all these years has been police unions who come to the legislature and dictate to legislators about law and order tactics, so to speak, and prevent the passage of legislation that would have changed, would have set this on a different course. But that's something now, I think, given the idea, given the fact that matter, that people can see what happens now. They see the police officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, who is already handcuffed, who is already restrained, can't be going away, can't cause a problem, can't do anything. But yet you got your knee on his neck. For what? I mean, what we witnessed was a public execution of a person. And now the legislators don't have to say, well, look, in my community, and I represent Northeast Houston. I represent Fifth Ward, the area where I grew up in. I can tell you that we didn't have such a great relationship with police officers because police officers were basically an occupying force in Fifth Ward. And that is a consequence of police officers knowing that the law protects them for certain behavior and misconduct. And our commitment from the Legislative Black Caucus is that we're going to change that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a good segue, Arthur, into our conversation about why voting is important, because what I'm hearing from State Rep Dutton is that you have unions, lobbyists that are basically preventing good law from taking effect, being voted upon, that would protect not just Black people, but all people, because we can all run afoul of the law and find ourselves in a situation where we're going to need that law to protect us. But let's talk about the voting aspect, because it sounds like from what I'm hearing from State Rep is that we got some good people in position, but they're not able to get some things passed that would be very good in protecting our rights as citizens in this country. But we also need to get some more people in there. So Arthur, let's talk about voting and why voting is a right that we should exercise. Talk about that.
So you're right, right on the mark there. At every level, there's government. It doesn't start when we grow past 18 and matriculate from high school to college. It starts when we're born, and it starts at the home. Your parents, whether it's single home, two parent home, there's authority and there's rules. And so you have an opportunity through our First Amendment to speak your mind. Well, voting is an opportunity to speak your mind. And it is all opportunity, the greatest protest out there to say you want change. Some are confused. Some believe that, well, my one vote doesn't count. It really does. It may not count at the highest level, seeing how we have 350 million people in the world, in the United States, but it counts at the local level. That's your school board, your school of trustees, your mayors, your all your governmental officials. You have a right to speak to them, and you speak to them through your vote. Certainly, it's nice to gather the attention in groups and in crowds and go and let them know, hey, I got a problem. We have a problem here. It needs to be addressed. But then again, I like your question. What is the solution? The solution is educating yourself on the issue. Once you're educated and you feel like you are, then go ahead and cast your vote for that person that you think that represents you best with respect to how you think things should work and how things should be. Can't express that any more importantly than just that. Get out, go vote, put the folks in there, and even if it doesn't go your way, trust me, they're looking at the numbers. I bet you Harold can tell you, they're looking at those numbers.
Absolutely.
And those numbers can flip. I've seen, Harold, we've seen it in 30 years that we've been practicing in Harris County. It started out in one population and totally flipped, swung back, and now we're in a different direction. So those numbers matter. And as the populations grow, and as we are able to educate ourselves and get ourselves in the position to be able to vote, what does that mean? I know Harold and them have tackled the issue with regard to convicted felons regaining their right to vote.
Absolutely.
There were some that decided or thought that that wasn't a good idea. But no, the law actually says just because once you served out your sentence, there's a time frame with all that, but most of them are not educated to that. So they don't go vote.
Yeah.
They just kind of just be absent of the process, and they're needed the most. I represent folks that find themselves in trouble. And some of them have ended up in places that nobody wants to be. But when they come home, when they've served their sentence and they're now productive citizens or can be productive citizens, they need to participate, and that participation is by vote. Let us not confuse. It's not just simply about the criminal law. Their vote matters with regard to taxes, education, employment, on and on and on. Folks think, oh, well, the legislators only deal with the crime. No, they're dealing with so many different things that affect them, even just getting a job.
Absolutely.
Getting an education. And that's critical. That's so very, very critical to what's going on in this world. But we want to just isolate it because we tend to monopolize the criminal justice system. We want to isolate it there, but education affects that.
Absolutely.
What affects that? Getting out and vote. My parents have been educators for 58 years. That's the main thing, and the only thing that they ever just beat us up on is you're going to be educated. Because at that point, you can have a better opportunity to defend yourself. By no means do I imply that folks that have been victimized are bad people or make bad decisions. By no means are we saying that. But you are better off educating yourself, and you can also participate by voting and assisting not only yourself, but your neighbor, your loved ones, your family.
Absolutely. I think Arthur, though, I think part of our issue though is, and I think which is what is bringing on sort of this, this feeling that what's the purpose of my vote? What's the purpose of my one vote? It's not going to change anything. I think part of the issue is we don't have purpose behind that vote, meaning when you don't know what it is that you're wanting, you don't know what to vote for, right? Because
Absolutely.
we've been voting and voting and voting, right? And it seems like things get worse and worse and worse. But I think a lot of it is because it's not strategic voting, right? Because if I got two candidates that I can choose from, and let's say one candidate is, let's say that, her position is she's tough on crime, right? Basically, she wants convictions no matter what, right? And then I have this other person who's maybe not so much tough on crime, but like to, have a whole view of things, right? Then I think you have to decide, okay, which one is more in line with what I want my vote to do, with the purpose.
Which is one of the beautiful things that Texas has taken on. up until this year, it was that you could just pull the lever, mark the ticket, and you just one party vote. Now you're actually having to not only know the person, you have to know what that person is about and the issues outstanding. So you have to make a conscientious choice, conscientious, educated choice with respect to the issue and the person. It's going to be interesting to see how this election runs.
So you got to think about it. Is that what you're saying now, Arthur? You got to, when you go to the polls, you actually got to think about where your vote, your one vote is going.
So all 150 people and issues on that ballot, however long that ballot is, you have to absolutely think about it. And I love it. I think it's great. I think now we won't have, we'll actually see a real potential here of politics actually getting out of the way and the issue coming to the forefront. Who's going to take care of the issue?
Oh, I like what you just said. Politics. Wait a minute, Arthur. I like that. You just said you have an opportunity for politics to get out of the way so we can now tackle the issue.
That's right.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah, well, I speak for my good friend Harold here. I mean, he's been tackling issues since we were in law school. I know what he's about.
Yeah, let me say this though. I mean, you know, the people who advocated doing away with the with this were basically my Republican colleagues, and they since they had lost an election, they figured the big lever was what called. They figured that people couldn't go through and select each Democrat. They have the opportunity. I don't necessarily follow that. I think people to still go through it. It'll take a little longer now to vote because you'll have to do that. But having said that, let me say this too. In terms of voting, I think most people don't realize how voting impacts their own personal life, particularly at the local level, where they believe that voting for the president of the United States is important. But it's equally as important, I think, as Arthur said, for you to vote for your school board members, for your council members, for your state representatives, state senators, your county commissioners. That's equally as important, if not more important, because the problem is that the things that are going to affect you every day, mostly every day, it's going to be those things decided at those levels, not at the federal level. The things at the federal level may affect you, and certainly will have an effect on you. But the everyday effect is going to be done by your state legislators, for instance. And most people don't associate the fact that the district attorney everywhere in America, somebody who voted in office. The people who are running the police department at the mayor's level, at the city level, they're all voted on. And these are people that get voted for. And if you recognize that, what you'll do is you'll go out and not only vote, but you'll begin to talk to your legislators. You'll begin to talk to your city council members. You know, because those are the people who are going to make a difference in your life. And I can't say that enough. That most people, many people, not most people, people who don't vote simply let other people decide their future and decide what Texas is going to look like, what this United States is going to look like for the children. And so somehow or another we gotta change that. But that's one of the things that we've been working on for some time, and we're going to continue to work on that until we get everybody voting. In 1991, when we changed the law regarding ex-felon voting, I thought it was a good idea because I remember when I went to, George Bush was governor at the time, and he invited me over to the house to to the governor's mansion to have dinner with him. And I went and he said, Dutton, well, let me ask you something. Why should I vote for this bill? Why should I sign this bill? And he was talking about the bill that I had done to to um, to give ex-felons the right to vote when they've completed their sentence. And what I told him was this. I looked at him in the eye and said, well, Governor, don't you think the system is fair? And he said, yeah, he thought the system was fair. I said, well, if that's true, then you ought to have an equal number of Republican ex-felons and Democrat ex-felons. And so it's not a partisan issue. This is an issue about being free, because I think that's what we got to all get to. Now, I think the quotes you started with earlier, from the book, it was all about, in one sense, it was about the freedom to go about your daily life without being affected by government. And I think that's where we ought to be. But at the same time, we've got to have the voters or what's between the government and your freedom. If you'll vote, you'll have more freedom and less government. And if you don't vote, you end up getting more government and less freedom.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
anyway.
Absolutely. I was saying something to Arthur earlier, and one of the things that I'm a big advocate of is, is we have to learn how to disrupt our thinking. And so and the reason why I kind of push that disrupt our thinking is because we all learn something that works today, right? And when you learn something that works today, it's great. It works today, right? Just like the reason why there's so many police protections was because at some point in the past, those laws were put in place based upon what was going on at that time. Right. And it worked then, right? But now it's time for us to disrupt that thinking because now we know better, right? And so one of the things I like to say is I always say you have to be willing to disrupt your thinking from yesterday in order to learn what you need to learn today, right? So it's time, we know something now. We know that 3 men on a drug investigation should not be allowed by law to go with a no-knock warrant in anybody's house, right? First of all, the charge just wasn't great enough to justify a no-knock warrant on a drug charge anyway, right? So that should be all automatic. Okay, this is drugs, right? We're making marijuana legal. So first of all, I have to ask the question, what kind of drugs? Because I hope we ain't talking about marijuana, something that, on a small amount is probably legal in most states. But we got to be willing to challenge the thinking that got us to where we are right now. Because as much as we emotionally are outraged by what happened in the Breonna Taylor case, right? We have to understand that only one guy was charged and only one was indicted. And as Arthur eloquently put it, he was indicted on that which Daniel Cameron believed he could actually prove in an actual trial.
And part of that also is that the Attorney General did take a look at and comb through the warrant. And if nothing else, his statement implies that he believes the warrant was obtained lawfully. Which goes back to Representative Dutton's comment that a magistrate, a judge, had to have reviewed something and go through certain procedures to see that all the steps were taken to then even grant a no-knock warrant. It's different than a regular warrant, but still, by the same token, that requires procedures. Yeah. Out of this, if I'm the defense attorney, coming in on that case, I'm going to challenge the warrant in court. But that's the only time you have to challenge. You bring up all kinds of motions to suppress and do other things that are going to bring about a challenge. But that's the time to do it from the defense perspective. It sounds like there's a lot of information out there that may even come to light as this case continues to go forward. I'm concerned about the actual criminal trial itself.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'll voice what my opinion is. I don't think that they will be able to convict Mr. Hankerson on wanton endangerment, not based upon when I looked at the elements. I just don't think. Let me tell you why. Let me read what the elements are. The elements for wanton endangerment in the first degree is when, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life, he wantonly engages in conduct which creates substantial danger of death or serious physical injury to another person. Now, the reason I think that they will not be able to get a conviction on that is because for me, the underlying actions that was legal was wanton, right? But you can't get there because they got the law, they got procedure to back up the fact that a warrant was issued, the fact that a no-knock warrant was signed by a judge so they can execute. So they were there legally under the system, the way the system is set up right now. So what was wanton? If I was the defense attorney, my question would be, what was wanton about what Mr. Hankerson did when his other two cohorts weren't charged at all? I would have a problem as a juror listening to that to understand how I could pinpoint just his actions and not the other two. I personally have a problem. I have a problem with it legally, in my legal mind, but I also have a problem with it from a layperson's mind, because I don't see how you get there. Otherwise, to me, the way I look at it is, out of the three, you chose the one that shot 2 more shots than the other, right? I think he shot 10. You know, it was a whole host of shots. All of them were wanton in my opinion. But that's going to be a hard conviction to get. But I would like to get y'all's thoughts, because y'all are definitely.
Well, I think he was
about this.
Yeah, he was the one that was charged. Was outside the house, was he?
He was like, I think, on the patio. Yeah.
Yeah, he was outside the house and but shooting through the wall. And I found that somewhat disingenuous too, because I don't know what he could have been shooting at. I have no idea. That's why I said I don't know all of the facts. But back to voting. The judge who reviewed this warrant, that person was voted in. I mean, and I don't know, but I would hope that a judge who looks at a application for a warrant and it doesn't make sense to them, says no. There's no to it. There's no, this doesn't really make sense. You need to go back and do some more surveillance or something. Had that been done in this case, guess what? We wouldn't be here.
Representative Dutton, this is what I found. This is what I found that was in the affidavit. I found that one of the detectives said in the affidavit that he saw, this is Jamarcus Glover, who's the ex-boyfriend who they were investigating. He saw that he had come out, came into Miss Taylor's apartment and came out of Miss Taylor's apartment with a package. And then after coming out with a package, I guess at some point then went into a known drug house. So that's something that I found when I was kind of trying to figure out what was in this affidavit. What would make a judge sign a no-knock warrant for a narcotics investigation like this? That's one of the things that I found. What does that change? Does that add any clarity?
No, it adds more questions.
Okay.
Because the question would become, how often did he do that, for example?
Good question. I don't know.
How big was the package? Was it big as a washing machine, or was it as small as a matchbox?
Yeah, see, that was my question. What's a package? Because I come in and out of my house all day with packages. My purse is a package. Yes.
Yeah, it could have been a birthday present or something. I don't know. But this raises more questions about the warrant itself, and whether or not it perhaps should have been inquired to get more questions answered before it was issued, before the judge signed it. I would hope that judges, particularly for no-knock applications, that those become more scrutinized because you'd have to determine. Now, what's in the affidavit that says it had to be a no-knock?
I couldn't
So
find it. My understanding was that what I was researching, that is what made it a no-knock. But I
Well,
haven't
if
read
that's-
the actual affidavit
If that's
itself.
all there is, if that's all there is, I'm a little, I'm a little upset
So
because you ought to have more than that. Simply, for example, did he come out at night with the package? Did he come out in the daytime? Did they stop him with the package and figure out what was in the package?
No.
So Harold, so on the no-knock warrant, clearly different from other search warrants and arrest warrants, there has to be an apparent danger,
Right.
and or particularly it must be an allegation that they believe that if they don't do this, that there will be a disappearance, a hiding of the evidence. I haven't seen the warrant, haven't seen the affidavit, but I don't understand that that is part of the application. But it all goes back to your vote and vote.
I was just about to say that, Arthur, it all goes back to the vote, but let me throw this another little monkey wrench. You know, that these officers were all plain clothes. They were not in uniform. So this was
a no-knock warrant, you're going to want, the purpose is an element of surprise.
Mhm.
Yes.
You don't want anyone to know that you're coming. But then at the same time, if, as Harold states, if I'm the judge, I want to know what's the alternative.
But how does that play into the fact that the person of investigation, Mr. Jamarcus Glover, I think is his name, had already been arrested earlier that day?
I don't know
So
what
with
jurisdiction
regards to
arrested him.
Miss Taylor's apartment, whether
We
you
don't,
Mhm.
yeah, we don't know what jurisdiction arrested him, so there's some communication issue there of
Okay.
saying, okay, he's in custody. I don't know those
Oh no,
facts,
he was let out on bail. He was let out on bail though.
but they don't all always communicate. You've
That's a
got a
good-
task force, you got the police department, you've got different entities, and that may have not all coordinated on this particular issue. Have no idea. Have
Gotcha.
no idea. They
But
probably should have.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Arthur. Right?
For
You're
example,
right.
how often, since they were surveilling Miss Taylor's apartment, how often did they see him go in and out of her apartment?
Right. That's a good question.
I don't know.
I mean, was it just that one time? I see that's what I'm saying. That raises a whole lot of questions with me about whether or not the affidavit for the application was done in good faith. Now,
Absolutely.
I know that police officers tend to put information in the affidavit which will support the granting of a warrant, but the approval of a warrant. But I think it's incumbent on the judge to ask questions, to look behind some of that stuff, because when it doesn't make sense to you, I think you ought to ask more questions. And
Absolutely.
obviously
Can I
here, it would.
can I interject this though?
Sure.
We have to also remember this is not over. The federal folks are conducting an investigation, probably into the things that we're speaking of. It's deeper, and I would think that they would ask these very questions that we're bringing up, and wondering what happened. How did we get here?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we get here? Yeah. Because one of the things that I, and it goes to what, that you're stressing, Arthur, which is voting, right?
Absolutely.
And thinking about this judge, right? And I know who the judge is, and I'm not saying that the judge is a good judge or a bad judge, right? But, when you start asking these questions about the affidavit, was this a judge that these officers knew I could put these little keywords in there, package, in and out, stuff like that they know that this judge, without thinking about it, is going to just sign off on it, right? And if that's the case, then in Louisville, Kentucky, that's a judge that you might need to figure out how to vote out the next election round, because
Well,
that's a problem,
I
right?
can write the best search warrant, no knock warrant, put together the best of the best that anyone would sign off on. The reality of the fact is that now you change
Uh-oh, you're muted.
what's going on, this law. Harold is just right on spot. You challenge this from every direction, and your vote counts, because if they're not willing to and we've got to look at it from both sides of the fence. I mean, is there a purpose behind a no-knock warrant? I'm not in law enforcement from that side of it, but if you're voting, you're going to investigate. You're going to look this up and then make a informed decision.
Exactly. Because it may be that there's purpose in a no-knock warrant, but only in certain types of investigations. Is there a purpose in a drug charge?
Well,
right?
let me
be
say,
a purpose in a drug charge.
let me say this. The more recent example in Harris County with the no-knock warrant ended up in the deaths of 2 people. Okay. And I think we have now all been advised that when you go back and you look at the warrant that gave them the opportunity to do that, it was sort of a fairy tale almost.
Sure.
It was a fairy tale almost. And I don't know how to say this without being nice, but I think the judge in this case, to the extent that the warrant itself or the application was such that it had all these big holes in it, somebody should have been asking for more questions. But then on the other hand, since you had some rogue police officers engaging in this conduct, I'm sure what they did is made the application look so flowery that a judge, even in looking at the warrant application, was inclined to grant it. But yet the history of it tells us that first of all, it was it was not done in good faith. There were problems with the factual basis for the warrant. And 3, now we find out that the police officer who made application for the warrant simply lied.
Fairy tale, just lied about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
So there you go.
There you go.
Yep.
There you have it. Fairy
And
tale.
to that extent, on the back end, that officer is facing charges.
Yes.
And unfortunately, you can't bring lives back. But the strength of the community forced and said enough is enough. And you go to the polls, you cast your ballot, and you say, hey, we want different.
Yep.
And there's been some changes made. There's been some judges down there. I've actually had a client that was subjected to that warrant. And so you just have to speak up.
Yes.
It sounds very simple, but it's the most powerful thing we have.
Right.
So just to summarize before we wrap up, all right. So we now understand that as emotional as this Breonna Taylor case is, right? We got to look behind the emotion and get to an objective view so that we can now know what we need to be asking people who are wanting to run for office, what questions we need to ask, what do we need to look for with regards to some of these politicians' platforms, what do they stand for? We can kind of look behind some of the flowery language, because sometimes we get so caught up in the political view of how people say something. They'll tell us a bunch of stuff that sound good, right? Until you go break it down and be like, they ain't said shit, right? They really hadn't said anything. It just sounds good.
Well,
right?
and then you don't, our judges that we elect, as I've said to one of them, it doesn't take much to be tough on crime. It takes a lot to be smart on crime.
Ooh, that's good.
And so sometimes when the facts present themselves, a judge has discretion. And I think that discretion ought to be used more often than not in being smart on crime, because being tough on crime doesn't send a message to anybody.
Representative Dutton, I don't even know if you understand how powerful what you just said, because we always get caught up in people's words, especially politicians who, no offense, because I know you're a politician too, but y'all can talk so good, right? And we got caught up, I think, over the past decades of tough on crime, hard on crime. But you just said something so profound, right? It's time to stop, being caught up in being tough on crime, but let's be smart on crime.
Yes, I mean, I remember I was trying to help and assist the people in South Africa where they don't have a system like ours because they don't have jury trials. But they had a guy that arrested and put in jail for stealing a chicken. He had been in jail for almost 2 years. I had to ask him, do you know how many chickens you fed him? And why would you do that? Why would that be a consideration? I look at some of our systems here. And of course, the bail is one that's been going through significant changes. But I think as long as we can ensure that somebody's going to stop doing whatever they're accused of doing, they're going to show up for court. I mean, that's all we need. And I don't think that sometimes we've been very smart because I remember when I got to the legislature and when I got there at a time when we were building prisons, and the more prisons we built, the more beds we had in prison, the more people we found to go in them. Now, I look at the juvenile justice system, and Arthur can talk about this too, but the juvenile justice system, where what we did is we've done away with more than half of the facilities for incarcerating juveniles in them. And
That's correct.
And guess what? Juvenile crime is down now. I mean, I just don't, so my
I
thing.
think one of the things, State Rep, not to cut you off, is that I think we have to understand that we play part in the life that we create. If you want to be tough on crime and you want to have all of these prisons, well, you got to have somebody to fill them, right? Then what that's going to cause? That's going to cause you to create more laws that says things are crimes that shouldn't be crimes. Think about, and just to talk about the smart on crime, right? At one point in time, marijuana, kids, adults going to jail for a joint, etc.
Right.
Now all of a sudden they got smart about it and said, wait a minute, that's a big business. We can learn how to make some money off of marijuana, and tax it, etc. Now all of a sudden a lot of states now are changing the law on marijuana. They got smart about it.
Absolutely. And that as much as anything is what we have to do in this situation. We have to be smart on crime and basically being smart on taxpayers, because taxpayers are the ones who fill this bill. And let me close with this. If somebody just texted me and start talking about police officers need more training. And let me say this, a police officer who is racist in their thoughts and in their application of the law, who doesn't have training, that once you train them, there's somebody who might be a trained racist who misapplies the law. And so I don't think it's training as much as it is in hiring and ensuring that we have the right people in place to be the people we want to serve us as police officers, because that ought to be the first thing that happens. The police officers have to be trained a little bit better. I acknowledge that, but at the same time, you can train horses, but you can't train a cow. And I don't care how much training you do, it's still going to be a cow now. And so for some people whose attitudes are so offensive to people based on race, they're afraid based on people's color of their skin. Those people, I don't care, any amount of training is not going to change that. And so one of the things we're going to do with the George Floyd Act, we're going to hold good police officers responsible for the acts of bad police officers, so that when they see something happen, they'll make sure that they are empowered under the law to do something about it now. And so that's one of the elements of our George Floyd Act. I didn't talk too much about that, but we're going to make sure that the Sandra Bland Act is more fully implemented on non-jailable offenses, that we have more offenses that are non-jailable, where a police officer can simply write a ticket. I think people are misunderstanding to some extent this whole call for defunding the police. I don't think any of us think we ought not have police. What we're trying to say is that we're asking police to do things kind of like we ask teachers to do almost. We're asking police officers though to do things that ought not be in the jurisdiction of police officers. And so those things ought to be done by the professionals who are better able to handle them. If they have a mental health person out there with a crisis, should we send the police officers to handle that? Or should we send a mental health crisis person out to handle that?
But that's where they always get us with the words, right? And then sometimes it plays on both sides. You know, you'll say defund the police, and nobody is saying cut down all the trees. We already made that clear. We want the law, right? So it's not that you're saying defund the police. You're just wanting to redirect some things that shouldn't be handled by the police, need to be handled by people more appropriate to deal with the situation.
Absolutely. And I think police officers would rather that happen too, because I don't think they just want to go out. If there's a dispute between husband and wife that's not physical, they get called out sometime to handle those. So what do you do about it? And at the same time, we got to remember this. There have been just literally hundreds of people who've been exonerated for crimes they were convicted of. Now you think about this. That person has been innocent. But what started that process? A police officer picked up that person. The police officer started it by picking up the wrong person for the crime.
Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. I thank each of you for joining us. And if we're recording at a trial, I say, give me your closing statement. If you have a last statement that you want to make, author, before we close out, I'll let you make it right now.
Well, I appreciate being on this panel with the two of you all. You're well-educated, good people, and we need more people out there doing this podcast. Representative Dutton, doing what you do. I will try my part and do.
Oh, you muted yourself. That's what happens.
Sorry if I went out there.
That's okay.
I just want to reiterate the importance of us educating ourselves. It is critical. I learned during this conversation a lot. I was reminded of a lot by smart people like yourselves. And I think we could all do ourselves some good by just getting and having these conversations. And they don't have to be angry conversations. They don't have to be overly emotional, even though we're attached to these conversations because they affect us. But most importantly, we've got a big election coming up all across this country, all across these cities and local jurisdictions. And I recommend and suggest everybody get out there and express your vote and feel good about it. I got a call the other day. Gentleman said, "Oh, early voting starts in a couple of weeks. Are you going to early vote? Are you sure?" I said, "Sir, I get a big kick out of election day. I will be there on election day. I'm definitely going to vote. And my voice will be heard because I'm going to tell everybody else not who I voted for, but I'm going to tell them what's on the ballot in respect to issues. And basically what's out there is our livelihood."
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. State Rep, do you have a closing?
Well, thank you again. I join Arthur in saying thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing this. I guess the last thing I'd like to do is sort of wake up all the people who have been silent, the people who are good people, basically. They have a job, they take care of their families, they go to church on Sunday, they do all the things that we hope that citizens actually do. They actually go vote, they actually talk to their neighbor, treat their neighbor right. But when it comes to being involved in the law, in developing the law, and in talking to their legislators and coming to Austin to the legislative session, I want to wake them up and say, look, part of the reason we find ourselves in the place where we are is because the silent people have been silent so long.
Mm,
They're good people, like I said, but silent, and they do absolutely nothing except all the things we think they ought to do. But when it comes to coming to Austin, when it comes to talking to your legislator, I don't think they do that. And if they do, they certainly don't do it often enough. And so I'm encouraging people, not only like Arthur said, to go vote. This is a historic election. Voting decides how you want your country to look in the future, how you want it to look for your children and your grandchildren. Um, and if you're going to do nothing about it, if you're not going to vote, what's going to happen is somebody else is going to decide how it looks. And but if you vote, you get to decide that. You get to decide how your schools are going to look. You get to decide how the police officers are going to be deployed in your neighborhood. You get to decide all of these things that we complain about. But at the same time, I think, to sit at home and let somebody else do it. All I'm saying is you be the one that does it on behalf of all the people who are silent. And
absolutely.
again, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I always like to say, if I'm the one, if you need a place to stay and you ask me to come stay at my house, don't expect to get the master bedroom in my house. We got to learn how to construct our own future, construct the life that we want to live. And it starts with voting in people who are in alignment with what we want to see and voting out people who are not in alignment. It's up to us. And so
Right.
I want to thank you, Representative Dutton. Arthur had to leave. I knew exactly what time he needed to log off. And so I just want to thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well,
This
thank you
is
very
Shon
much.
Speaks, and I am so glad that you have tuned in to this podcast. And our condolences to Breonna Taylor's family. They're still dealing with this. And I'm just hoping that you get out and you exercise your vote and be strategic about it. I understand the issues with whether or not you think you should vote or not vote, but you have to be strategic with your vote. Thank you so much. Ashe, free thinkers. Ashe, may what you say manifest in your life today and every day. Ashe.